Michelle, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for your service. I have such respect for people who have served and protected this country, and what you've done is nothing short of amazing. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. I think when you're in the thick of it, you lose perspective on it. But now being in the civilian world for a few years, I appreciate the people that are still serving. So I'm starting to gain a little bit of like the outside perspective on that.
Yeah, you're trained that way, right? Like it's just literally this is what I
Normal.
do. It's
Yep.
yeah, it's so normal. I'm friends with a guy named Jason Redmond, who's a former Navy
Mm.
SEAL,
Yep.
and he was very much the same way. He was just like, "This is my job. This is what I do." And but yeah, like once you're able to kind of tune back in, it's just a totally different mindset. What's it been like? You've now been retired from the military, I believe, if I do the math correctly, 4 years.
So three. Yeah. So I separated at the 13-year point, went to the reserves for 1 year, and then completely left at, I guess, the 14-year mark. And so I've been out for 3 years now. So I still feel like that was yesterday. I'm in that like weird conflicting feeling spot where it feels like I literally was just flying for the Thunderbirds like a second ago. And it also feels like a whole lifetime has happened since then.
Yeah, well, I feel like time since COVID, time has just been the weirdest thing, right? Yesterday was a year ago, and 5 years ago was yesterday, and, and
I
we're just
agree.
dealing with this weird delusion of what time is at this point. But you mentioned the Thunderbirds, and I was going to wait a little bit to bring it up, but since you brought it up, let's talk
Yeah.
about that. So
Sorry.
you were no worries. You were the fifth woman Thunderbird of all time,
Yeah.
which first of all is absolutely incredible. So kudos for you. Let's talk a little bit about how did that happen. I mean, you guys are the best of the best. The way that you fly, the way you coordinate, the way you entertain is absolutely amazing. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, there's quite the backstory that happened before that. So, to even apply to the Thunderbirds, you have to be an experienced fighter pilot in the Air Force. So, that generally to hit the hour requirements that they have takes, I would say, 5 or 6 years of being like in an operational combat squadron. Before you even get there, you have about 3 years of flying training that you have to go through before you show up to your first combat unit. So,
Wow.
you're already well into your career before you're even eligible to apply to the Thunderbirds. And I'm sure we'll get in more to the backstory, but I had gone through quite a, I guess, transformative experience in my career where I really struggled at the beginning with self doubt, with imposter syndrome, with just being like, wow, I actually achieved this massive goal I set out to get of becoming a fighter pilot. Now I'm here and I don't feel like I'm the best fit for it, which I think is a pretty common experience for a lot of really driven high achievers. And then they arrive and then they're like, oh no, now what? But I went through this rapid period of growth after that, really pushing myself outside my comfort zone and saying yes to things that scared me. And it just changed my life in like I would say an 18-month time frame of really just building a lot of confidence and empowering myself to at least have the perspective to entertain really bold moments of inspiration and to not just write them off as like, oh, that would be cool, but it's hard, it's scary, I probably won't get hired, all the things. And so when I saw the email that the Thunderbirds were hiring, it was always something that had intrigued me, but it was also something I never told anyone I wanted to do
Hmm.
because I had a lot of doubt around if I was good enough to be part of that team. And so I really didn't tell anyone until the day I saw that email. And it wasn't just the email that Air Force Personnel Center sends out that's like, hey, the Thunderbirds are hiring. It was like, hey, dum dum, if you haven't seen the last three emails we've sent about this, which I didn't because I just deleted a lot of those emails from AFPC.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, it's like, oh, and I don't know what they're sending me, but it's not important. This one was like, applications are due next week, like last call. And I had that moment where I read it. I was like, I actually meet all of these requirements. I'm in a position in my career where I feel like I have the experience level to actually consider this. And in a position personally where I actually believe in myself to like give it a go. And so I went to my boss that day and I had a really great relationship with him. He was awesome. And we had talked a lot about career planning, what I was going to do next. I actually already had a follow on assignment coming up in about 3 months to move from Texas, where I was stationed, to New Mexico. So my path was kind of already laid out for the next 3 year assignment.
Yeah.
I go to him and I'm like, hey, sir, so I saw the Thunderbirds are hiring. And it was not like a a military movie scene where I like walk in and stand at attention and I'm like, sir, I want to apply to the Thunderbirds. It was very much me like, so what do you think about this? And he's like, so do you want to apply? And I'm
Mm.
like, I think so. That's what I said. I think so. And he's awesome. And like, I tell this story a lot to my corporate audiences because I think it's a really cool example of the power you have as a leader. And he, in that moment, could have rightfully said, hey, you never brought this up in our career planning. You're about to go to your next assignment. You should probably apply next year. Like, we kind of missed the boat on this one. And I would have been like, yep, totally makes sense. Instead, he said, I think you'd be perfect for this job. What can I do to help you get your application in on time?
Mm. That's
And
huge.
yeah, it changed everything. I mean, it completely changed my life because that was what tipped me to believing in myself enough to be like, okay, I'm going to apply. And then I got hired. And then 3 years of crazy experiences. And then what I'm doing now, none of that would have happened had he said the other thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, and having that thought on the last email they were sending out, right? That's the
Yeah.
universe being like, "Yo, hey, we've been trying to tell you this. This is this is where you're supposed to go." But then answering that call, and only four women doing it before you. Did you know that was the number beforehand?
I didn't know what the exact number was. I just knew that there had only been a few. I knew of the first one, Fifi Malakowski, which was in 2005. And then the very first time that I ever saw the Thunderbirds fly, which wasn't until I had graduated pilot training and already been told that had been picked to go fly the F-16. But I was kind of in this like tweener land of I had graduated, but I wasn't moving yet to my next base to go fly the F-16. So I was a student, had this great news, and I'm here for like a month at the Air Force Base in Columbus, Mississippi. And the Thunderbirds happened to be coming to town to do an air show there. That is my first time ever seeing them. And when they came through, they had a party at the Officers Club, like a PR event where people from the base could come and stuff. And the narrator, who's also a pilot, was a woman. And I
Mm.
remember seeing her as like a brand new pilot in the Air Force, knowing that I was going to go learn to fly the airplane that they fly, but having never touched one before. And it's funny because I know her now, her call sign's Mother. And I was so intimidated by her that I like just eyed her from across the O Club the whole evening and never went up and introduced myself. And later we would connect through mutual friends, and she's just like an amazing person. We're good friends now, and I tell her that story, and she's just like, that's so dumb. I'm like the least intimidating person ever, which is true. She's so nice,
That's
but I was
amazing.
so
So
scared of her.
there, there's so many directions I want to go with this. Just that moment of you seeing her up there and going, "Oh, I want to be doing those types of things." I think there's so many people who sit in the audience, whether it be literally or figuratively, and they see people doing things and they go, "I want to do that," and they don't claim
Yes.
it, they don't make the next step. And how powerful of you to finally go, "Hey," go to your boss and say, "Hey, I want to do this." Right? That was the defining moment
Yep.
of being able to kind of overcome those limiting beliefs and those thoughts in your head. And as you say, imposter syndrome. I think that's so powerful. But I want to go back a little bit further, and then we'll dive into a bunch of different things. But I want to talk a little bit like, why did you join the military? What was the calling
Yeah.
for you? Like, so many people, it's like, oh, my dad, my grandfather was in it. Like, what was your calling into the military?
Yeah. So I think mine's a little bit less, maybe it's not less common. I think it's just less likely to be given as the answer. So I was a student in high school, a good student, good grades, and my parents were like, hey, you could probably get a scholarship. We don't have a big pot of money sitting here for you. So let's look at those opportunities. I grew up in a really small town, Wisconsin, about 4,000 people. I knew I wanted to get out of there. I knew I wanted to, travel the world, do something exciting. I was an adventurous kid. And my dad suggested Air Force ROTC. I had no idea what it was. But he had seen, when he went to college, he had seen the cadets running around campus. He wasn't involved with it in any way. He just like remembered seeing it and that they had jobs waiting for them. And he thought I would do well in that environment. I pushed back a little bit. But once we explored it, I was like, oh, I get to be a normal college student. If I get a scholarship, they pay for my entire degree. I have a job waiting, and I only have to do 4 years on active duty to pay that back. And then I'm good to go. And so that was like the first thing that drove me into the military was honestly the education benefits. But I went to college as a criminal justice major
Mm.
because I planned on doing those 4 years and then getting out, and I wanted to apply to the FBI Academy. I wanted to be an FBI agent. That was the whole goal.
Yeah, but then it wasn't. Why'd you stay? Did you fall in love with the military and being in the Air Force and doing all that stuff?
So about halfway through college, we visited a base with my ROTC detachment. We went down to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, and I got to see two F-15s, so two fighter jets, take off in full afterburner at dusk for a training mission from the edge of the ramp. And I was just like, holy crap, I need to go do that. Like, this FBI thing seemed cool, but that seems way cooler. Like, how do I compete to get a pilot slot? And through the ROTC program, that's really just raising your hand and putting your name in the hat when they ask who wants to compete for a pilot slot. So those jets and seeing them up close and just getting goosebumps and the whole thing, I was like, okay, that encourages me enough to, put my name out there and see. And then I got a pilot slot. And when you go to pilot training, the Air Force is putting a lot of time and money into training you. So it wouldn't make sense for someone to leave 4 years later. You like literally wouldn't even be done with training and you'd be like, bye.
Yeah.
So you incur a 10-year commitment. And that commitment doesn't start until you graduate pilot training, which is about 2 years after you enter the Air Force, after you graduate college. So it ends up being 12 to 13 years before that initial contract is up. And that's the point where a lot of people decide to either stay in until 20 or they get out. And most people will go fly for the airlines at that point if they do decide to leave active duty. So it was kind of like, I mean, I think the Air Force did exactly what they want to do, right? They bring people in with education benefits, and then they're like, ooh, here's this cool flying job. And then all of a sudden it's 13 years later. And that was not my plan, but it worked out.
Yeah, I have a buddy who now flies for Southwest who took that route, right? Like that seems like the next best thing. And a lot of times, like if somebody's in the army, they go into the police force or whatever the case may be. But to hear that calling and then take it is such a huge step. But I also want to shine light on the percentage chances of getting that pilot slot because
Yeah.
I know you mentioned on your website about how it's like what was like 2 in 15 actually got a pilot slot.
So I don't know what the exact numbers were for pilot slots out of ROTC. My class was like 25 people, and I think like 4 or 5 of us got pilot spots, but not everyone wanted one. So I think it's pretty, I wouldn't say easy. It's pretty doable if you're really driven and you focus on all the things that they look at, like GPA, physical fitness, all this stuff to get the initial slot. But then you get to pilot training, and now it gets really competitive, especially if you want to fly fighters. Because each class generally, I don't know what the exact numbers are now, but when I was going through, each class was getting between 1 and 3 fighter aircraft, and there's 25 people in the class.
Wow.
So there's a splitting point halfway through where you kind of go down this track where you start flying a jet trainer to prep you the fighter bomber track. And only 6 of us went down that path. So that was kind of like the first big wicket where you're like, okay, I got to get T-38s, which is what the little training jet is called. Make that. And now there's 6 of us. We're flying together all the time. These are your best friends. You party with them on the weekend. They're also your competition. And at the end of that program, 1 or 2 of you will probably actually have your dream come true. And the rest of you will go fly other aircraft in the Air Force, which are still great careers, still amazing assignments that you get to do really cool missions. But for a lot of us, being a fighter pilot, not just an Air Force pilot, but a fighter pilot,
Yeah.
is the dream. And so on drop night, when you find out what airframe you're going to go fly, dreams are made, dreams are shattered. It is quite the evening, but I found out I was going to go to the F-16, which had been my first choice. And that was still just a surreal thing to find that out after, I don't know, like 5 years of running towards that goal.
What do you think set you apart from the other people in the class?
I am very driven to specific goals. That's just my personality. And I think, being good academically growing up and carrying that kind of like habits and time management and study habits and all the things. I was a good test taker too, which really sets you apart early on because the first phase of pilot training is all simulators and academics. Like you don't go fly an airplane day one.
Right.
There's so many tests you have to take. And when you can learn that stuff fairly quickly and you're good at memorizing and you can score well on all the academic stuff, It not that it really matters, honestly, if you got like a 90 something on a test or like an 85 on the test in the long run, no one cares. But I think it gives you more confidence as you're in this hard program where you set yourself up as like a high performer in the instructor's minds, but also in your own mind, which I think gives you more confidence as you go into the simulators and then you go into the flights. Because I think a lot of pilot training is a mind game where I see people when they start to really build that momentum and they do well and they prove to themselves that they're capable and they build that confidence, they just start to do better and better. But someone with the same aptitude might have one bad flight and they start to dwell on that bad flight and it starts to snowball and it impacts the next one. And now they've had two bad flights and all of a sudden that person washes out of the program, even though they were just as capable as the person who ended up top of the class.
Yeah, in baseball they call that the yips. So
Yeah.
the idea of like that one mistake is just so stuck in your head that you
Yep.
do it over and over and over again. I want to talk a little bit about how scary it is. So first of
Yeah.
all, how many people have a fear of flying? Right? Like quick backstory about me. I had zero fear of flying. I never even really thought about it. I'd get to the airport, get on the plane, and go, and I fly
Yep.
all the time. I then got married and now have two stepkids, and so there's more than me. And now I have a
Hmm.
fear of flying all the time. Like the plane shakes a little bit. I'm like, oh God, what's going
Yeah.
on? I couldn't imagine doing what you do, flying upside down, doing all these crazy things. Did you ever have a fear around flying that you had to push through?
I didn't. I thought it was exciting. I loved it. I'll be honest, right out of the gate. I didn't struggle with motion sickness at all, which there's people that do, and I don't know how they possibly get through the program being sick
Yeah.
every flight. It's quite incredible. I think there was a fear of failure. That was a massive motivator for me. It's still a motivator for me, but I loved adventure. I had gone skydiving before that. I like tights. I loved roller coasters, and so flying just felt like another extension of that. And even at the level of the Thunderbirds, where you are very close to other airplanes and very close to the ground, and if something goes wrong, bad stuff will happen. I didn't really, I mean, I had moments where I was like, oh no, that was a very near miss. That shook me for a minute. But I generally didn't have a fear of the physical harm that could potentially come because you're so focused in the aircraft and you're the one in control, which I think makes it feel better than
Yeah.
being a passenger. I will say when we're coming into land and it's super sketchy and I live in Vegas and it's so bumpy here and there's crazy crosswinds and I don't really judge the pilots, but I have this like internal timer when I feel the airplane start to flare, which is like where you shift right before you touch down and I hear the engines come back and I have this kind of internal timer where I'm like, we should touch down. And when that doesn't happen, I'm like, oh man, we flared high. So we're just like waiting, and I know it's going to be a hard landing and I like anticipate it, but it doesn't really scare me, I think, because I know how well the pilots are trained. Like the performance level of check rides and the safety standards the airlines have, the training we had in the military, it's so rigorous.
Yeah.
Like, of course, stuff can go wrong, but I'm way more concerned about the driver next to me on the interstate. Who knows what their training is like,
Yeah.
or who
Yeah,
they're
they failed the
texting.
driver's test 15
Yeah.
times before they got their license. You talk about using fear as a motivator, but a lot of
Mhm.
people have fear and it stops them in their
Yeah.
tracks and they don't ever move forward. What would you say to somebody who is experiencing fear for their growth, whether it be in their career as an entrepreneur, in a relationship, whatever the case may be? What is something they can do to shift perspective and make that fear a motivator to push them forward?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing to start with, because it takes a little bit of time to flip that perspective. It's easy for me to get on here and be like, just go do the thing.
Yeah.
But I think you have to realize how normal it is. Like the first thing is to just recognize it for what it is, just to like zoom out a little bit and be like, oh, I'm scared right now. Because I think a lot of us, when we're in it, we don't even label the feeling that we're having as fear.
Mm,
We're just like coming up with reasons we shouldn't do the thing, right?
yeah.
And so like just zooming out and be like, oh, recognizing I am scared right now. And then I think a lot of times, either if you have a trusted friend you can talk to about it, or just writing down like what this worst case scenario that you're afraid of actually is, right? Like public speaking, for example, which I do a lot of now, is scary. It's scary to me. It's scary to
It's
most
like the
people.
number one fear. Like people are
Yeah.
more afraid of that than death, which blows my mind.
Right. Yeah, I think there was a quote where it's like most people at a funeral would rather be the person in the casket than the person giving the eulogy, like which
Yeah.
is just logically makes no sense. So if you write down the worst case scenario, it's like, oh, I'm on stage. They obviously brought me here because they want to hear my story. They respect my background. I trip and fall down. That is some solid fodder for a joke, which is like the best thing with an audience is to make them laugh. Or I forget what I was saying. Cool. I pause for a second, collect myself. I can even say it out loud to the audience, like, just totally lost my train of thought. I hate when that happens. Okay, we're back. And they'll be like, yep, we get it because we've
Yeah, that
been there.
humanizes you. Yeah.
Right. And so I think being like, what is the worst case scenario? A lot of times when we get it out of our head onto a piece of paper or verbally out to someone, we're like, oh, that's not that bad considering the best case scenario is I get paid this amount of money, I impact this many thousand people. It opens doors to this new relationship or opportunity I didn't even know was going to exist, blah, blah, blah. Like when you actually do, it's, the simplest thing where your parents would be like, well, just make a pro con list when you're trying to make a decision. It's like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's around that fear. Is it actually logical and rational? Because a lot of times it's not. So building that perspective, normalizing it, making you realize that it's probably not as bad as you actually think, and sharing it with someone else is super powerful. But then there is a point where you do have to just go do the thing. Because
Yeah.
I think people have this misconception that it's confident people that go and do this, like go take action. But I think it's taking action that creates confident people. And
Mm.
we forget that.
Yeah, for sure. I remember I was 19 years old and I was in a direct sales job because I was not like you. I was not good in school. I was a terrible test taker. So college was not my route. And I started this whole crazy journey in direct sales. And, we had to make phone calls and set appointments and then go to the appointments. And I would never make the phone calls.
Yep.
And I would say, I'd make up excuses, with my boss that I had at the time and mentor. And really, I was afraid, right? I was like
Yep.
worried about the rejection, so I would make up excuses. And he said to me this line that I use all the time with people in my mastermind and stuff like that, which is excuses are the nails that built the house of failure. And so every time, like I start to make an excuse as to why I'm not doing the next big crazy thing, I say that quote, and it brings me to that moment, like you were saying. It's like, oh no, why am I not really doing this? Like, what am I
Yeah.
actually afraid of? And like, what's the truth? Like, it's my brain protecting me. I get it, but what's the truth, and what are we trying to set out for, right? And we're painting this amazing picture of your life and what you were able to accomplish. But the reality is, it wasn't always easy for you, right? You also suffered from imposter syndrome. And I want to talk a little bit about that. When was the first time in your life you experienced imposter syndrome, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. So I go through all that training. I get that pilot slot. I go off to pilot training. I do well in that program. It's really hard, but I enjoy it. I get the F-16. I go to F-16 training, and now it's a little bit harder. Now I'm not so easily like top of my class. I always compare it to like the valedictorian in high school goes off to Harvard,
Yeah.
and then they're kind of just average and they're
Yeah.
like, what just happened? So it was a little bit of that. So that did shake my confidence some. Like I had a couple bad flights in that program, but by the end of it, I felt like I was on par with my peers. Like it felt fine. It really became a factor when I got to my first combat squadron in Misawa, Japan. So it's a fairly isolated city in northern Japan. You likely don't speak Japanese, at least I didn't and don't. And so your world is kind of very small. It's all consumed by the people in your unit. You live on base. Your neighbors are also your squadron mates, all the things. And I go into that being like, okay, first unit, I have to prove myself. Like how I show up here, how I do here is setting my reputation for my 10-year career in this community. Also, at that time, about 2% of fighter pilots were women. So there's another added layer of Alice being either the only one or one of two in any unit class, anything I was part of. And so I think there was this added feeling of scrutiny where I felt like I was under a microscope. I felt the added pressure of if I do well, I set the reputation for all the other female pilots that are going to follow my footsteps, where they will be assumed to be good at this job and people will welcome them, or the opposite.
Mm.
And I also felt like there was a lot of walking on eggshells where a lot of what was culturally acceptable in my squadron fell on my shoulders because someone would say something inappropriate and every head in the room would turn and look at me. And how I reacted was what the litmus test for if it was okay to make jokes like that or not okay.
Why was that? Why was that the case?
This I The fighter pilot culture was going through a very transformative time. Coming from like the Vietnam, Korea era, it's a work hard, play hard mentality. And there's a lot of gallows humor, which I'm all for. Like it's kind of necessary. But a lot of that was kind of locker room culture, right? With it being primarily guys, it's a tough environment. And I get that. I don't fault people for it.
Sure.
But it does start to get weird when you're a woman in that environment and you're performing at the same level as all the guys. You met all the same requirements to get there. You competed for a spot. And now you're just trying to establish yourself in that community. And someone says, not even to you or about you. No one ever did that because these are my friends. But they would make some joke and everyone would be like, oh, we probably shouldn't say that. And they would look at me and be like, did Mace laugh? If she did, she's cool, like one of the guys, and it's okay. If she didn't, then this is uncomfortable for us. And now we don't know how to respond to this. And it's been one of those things that's tricky to talk about because, like I said, these are my friends. These are
Yeah.
people I trust with my life in a combat situation. But I'm not going to pretend it wasn't a thing to navigate because I felt a lot of pressure around it. Be like, if I speak up when something does make me uncomfortable, now I'm rocking the boat and risking being like alienated from this team I need to be part of. If I go with the flow, but it does make me feel uncomfortable, now I feel kind of like that ick where you're like inauthentic feeling where you know you should speak up because it doesn't align with your values. But, everyone's felt that disconnect.
Oh, 100%.
And I also feel like I'm setting the next woman who comes into the squadron up for failure because she's going to walk into that environment and, oh, Mace was cool with these jokes and you're not. Like, you probably shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So I talk about that second because that was very much going on. But a huge part of it is that the job is just really hard and you're really bad at it when you're a beginner. And that's true for everyone. But I didn't have perspective on that. So being that high achiever who felt like they could, put in time and work and really muscle their way through anything and be really good at it. I got there and I'm putting in 12-hour days. It doesn't matter. Everyone around me is more experienced. And I just sucked at first. And it just shook my identity.
Yeah, what were the thoughts that were running through your head? Was it the like, I'm not good at this, I'm not enough? Like, because I think sometimes, the word imposter syndrome has become very popular because everybody deals with it. So with that being said, like, what can that look like in other people? What is that narrative they're saying in their head that they can go, hold on, let me identify this as imposter syndrome?
Yeah, very much what you described. So I would have a great flight, but I would do something minor wrong and I would just fixate on that. Even if people around me were telling me like, oh man, you really crushed that. Like, you're doing great. That was above average flight. I would be like, well, I was a little bit late on that shot, or I could have like done that. Like, I was just so fixated on that. And maybe that's what made me good enough to get to the level I did. But I think there's some balance there because I truly did not have perspective that all of the other brand new young wingmen in my unit were feeling the same way. Like, no one talked about it. Everyone at work had their mask on of like, I'm type A, I am confident, I have this together. And I don't remember a single person being like, look, you probably feel like you're overwhelmed right now, huh? Yeah, that's normal. Even though they all felt that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when the external feedback is not matching up with the internal narrative that you have, I think that's a time to be like, wait, this inner critic is what I call it. This inner critic that's spewing all these things about you're not the right person for the job. You're not good enough. You're not actually smart enough for this. Where's the evidence? Like, that's not automatically factual. Let's compare it to some external evidence to see if that's backed up.
Yeah, and I love how you said that. It took me back to I've been doing this podcast for 9 years, and about 7 years ago, Inc. magazine listed me as a top 8 podcast every entrepreneur should follow. My show blew up, and it was like this really weird, like, I never realized this was going to be a thing. And I would run into people in the streets or like at an event or whatever, and they go, "Oh, I listened to your podcast," and my response was always, "Oh, you're the one." It was way more than one person listening to my show. And it was like this whole like narrative of them wanting to acknowledge like, hey, I love your show. I listened to it. And then me downplaying, go, oh, you're the one listening to it. Because because you don't quite catch up to the work, right? And so you're
Yeah.
creating this narrative in your head. How were you able to work through that and then create this confidence in order to become the fifth woman to be a Thunderbird?
Yeah, I went through a really rough period for 3 years in Japan where I honestly would have quit had I not been in a I say had I not been in a contract with the Air Force, but of course they would never force you to fly a fighter jet if you're like, I don't want to do this. That would be a safety issue. So
Yeah.
they would have reclassed me into a different airplane. I think what really felt like it was holding me in that path was just the shame and embarrassment that would come with quitting, right? Like reaching that high level and then being like, nah, I quit. Like that's like someone getting to the NFL and they're just like, this is too hard. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I was like, not going to do that. But I get to my next assignment in Texas. It's just like after 3 years of struggling, and I'm like, wow, I cannot operate like that for another 7, 8 years in this job. Like it is just not sustainable to feel like I'm playing dress up, like I'm pretending that I'm confident and I know what I'm doing and I'm sure of myself when on the inside I'm just like filled with doubt. Like we need to align my reality with actual reality because I am like on a surefire path to burnout. And I also found that getting to that new squadron was a gift because it was an opportunity for me to reinvent myself and be like, who do I want to show up as in this new group of people? They don't know anything about me. They just know I was at this other unit for the last 3 years. I had also gone through a divorce while I was in Japan, which felt like the biggest failure. Like I felt like I had minor failures in the aircraft, but this was like internalized failure, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not the kind of person that gets a divorce. I'm surely a failure now. And
Mm.
that made that assignment extra difficult on top of the professional stuff we already mentioned. So I get to Texas and I'm like, no one here knows about that. They don't care about it. They didn't like know my ex-husband and weren't part of my life. You know what I mean? Like you just suddenly fresh start. And I had kind of this epiphany where I was like, I need to show up and say yes to those things that are scaring me. Because I had a lot of specific examples where they'd be like, hey, we need someone to lead this mission, or we need someone to go travel this place to plan this exercise we're doing or whatever. And I was having that feeling of like, please don't pick me because that's an opportunity to fail.
Yeah.
And I was seeing my peers that would be like, I'll do it. We're just growing so quickly. And I was like, damn, that's scary, but I need to be the one that starts being like, I'll do it. And so I started saying yes to like all the things that I knew. It was really a gut feeling, like you should go do something, but then you have that apprehension. And I just became really good at zooming out and recognizing that feeling and being like, that's something we say yes to. I'm the type of person that says yes to those things. And I did that for probably about a year and a half, like really intentionally. And it changed my life in an insane way. Like the yeses got bigger and bolder, and I got to deploy, which was like a really cool experience to just show myself that I was capable of actually doing this in the real world, not just
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
And eventually I became an instructor pilot. So I got to teach other people. I got to teach those new wingmen who were just like I was, like worried that they weren't right for the job, messing everything up. And I think my experience with that being what it was, talked to my students about that. I'd be like, yeah, you messed that up. Here's how we fix it. But also, that's a really common mistake to make at this point. Like, don't let it get in your head. And I think that made me a better instructor.
Yeah. Were you able to see their body language change when you took that approach?
People would open up. Like, they would
Yeah.
go from just being like, yes, ma'am, like one word answers to, yeah, I've been really struggling with this. I just don't feel. And the more I talked about it, the more people opened up about it. And now people reach out in the DMs and they like bare their souls. And it's like pretty incredible the things that people will share and the people who are sharing them. A lot of times it's people you wouldn't expect that are on the outside very successful. And they're just like, hey, I just wanted to let you know your content's really helping me because I've been struggling with those feelings of doubt, those feelings of imposter syndrome. And even sometimes me being the one talking about it is like, really? That person?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
it's just, it was building over time. And I call it SBCs, small, bold choices,
Mm, I
small,
love that.
bold things. Like, what can you do today that if you do fail, it's not going to set you back like an insane amount. It's not going to scare you out of action. It's just bold enough that it forces you to grow a little bit. And then you just repeat it. It's like going to the gym, right? It just takes repetition and you grow with it, and give yourself 6 months. Do that intentionally for 6 months, and it is crazy the growth that will happen.
Yeah, I think it's I don't remember who said it. Somebody way smarter than me, but they said something that's along the lines of like, oh, it's Tony Robbins. He said, so many people overestimate what they can do in a week, but severely underestimate what they can do in a year.
Yep.
And it is that idea of, showing up for yourself every single day and those small incremental wins, which will lead to, like you said, those bigger yeses, which then you're like, okay, these bigger yeses leads to that next opportunity, right? And obviously, as you went through your career, it was coming to an end, and you had an option. You could stay or you could pivot and do
Yep.
what you do now. What was that like, jumping into corporate speaking and writing books? And we'll get to the book here in a second, but like doing all these things, was that a scary jump for you to say, okay, I can go be that person on stage and be the presenter?
100%. I think there were a few key times in my life where I had this spark of inspiration and then the fear, but then I was able to find the courage to just go do it. And, like, all the way back from deciding I wanted to fly fighters to applying to the Thunderbirds to leaving. And people were pretty shocked because coming off of 3 years with the Thunderbirds and ending, two of those being the lead solo, people are like, oh, you're on track for a successful military career. You're going to go be a commander. You're going to do 20 years. Maybe you'll be a general. And I realized that that wasn't really what I wanted, and that there was a different way where I could have a lot bigger impact. And my friends that stayed in, like, we need those people, right? Like, we need those people to lead our military. But during those 3 years on the Thunderbirds, it went from, wow, this is really challenging flying, to wow, this is really fun flying, to wow, we do this a lot. And I've been doing it for 3 years and we do it 100 times. And it's not mundane, but it becomes fairly routine.
Yeah.
And so the most fun part of the job started to shift for me as I got comfortable with the flying, and I didn't feel like that stress of learning all of that was so consuming, that I could finally pay attention to everything else I was getting to do, which was having these incredible interactions with people. And it was both men and women, but the little girls really stick with me because there being so few female fighter pilots out there doing air shows. A lot of parents would bring their kids up to the autograph line after we would land, and it would be like a 7, 8, 9-year-old girl, and they would be like, look, she just flew those jets you just watched. That one you liked that went upside down, that was her. And these kids are shy pretty often, right? They're kind of intimidated by you in your blue suit. And they would look up and a light bulb would go on in their eyes. You could see it happen. Where this little girl now sees what's possible for her in the world as expanded, right? Like, options just opened. Her dreams and what those could look like just got bigger. It was the coolest thing I got to do in my entire career, to be the person to do that. And
Yeah.
I started to shift my focus from being super hypercritical of myself and everything I said and how I acted, and constantly trying to live up to this perfect fighter pilot avatar that I was just never going to be. And I started to shift to the impact I could have, and moving that spotlight from internal to external impact and helping other people. Those feelings of doubt and imposter syndrome got so much quieter.
Mm.
And it was that point I got asked to do a speaking event, but it was like 6 months out in the future. So timeline wise, it was after I was going to be done with my time on the Thunderbirds anyway. And I was like, that was something that I thought would be really rewarding. Let me look into what that would look like. Like, what does that business look like? Could I make a profit doing that? Could I be full time doing that? All the stuff. And I think it was probably a month after I got that business card where I was like, I don't want to go fly for the airlines. I don't want to go back to a gray F-16 squadron. I want to take this timing, this platform, this momentum, and my story, and I want to talk about it openly. Because the Thunderbirds give me a platform. People see that in my byline, and they're like, okay, I want to have you on my podcast, or okay, I want to hire you as a speaker. What's, I think, allowed me to do this for 3 years and will continue to allow me to do this is that I talk about the human part of it, right? It's not just excellence and fast jets and Top Gun. It's failure and fear and self-doubt. And the feedback I get from my speeches all the time is like, whoa, you're really inspiring. But what was really impressive to me is that you're so relatable. Like it
Mm.
felt like you wrote that speech for me. And I love that. Like that's the best compliment I could ever get.
Yeah, so you mentioned Top Gun. How much is it like the movie Top Gun? I'm sure you get that question
Oh
all the
yeah.
time.
Yeah. So I love Top Gun Maverick. They did a great job. The cinematography is so good. I love that they put the actors in actual jets. I mean, there's some tactical issues with the whole plan and all the things, but as to be expected. But I think taking it for what it is, entertainment value, I think they did an amazing job. I
Yeah,
I love it,
I,
and it's been cool because it gives people perspective. Like when I say, "Oh, I was doing a dogfight and I almost G-locked," people have a scene in Top Gun to reference.
yeah, it's so funny when you mentioned, like these are my friends, but I'm competing against them. We party on the weekends together. Then and I
Yep.
like when you said that, I thought about Top Gun, right?
Hmm.
Both of them, and Top Gun Maverick was, I went and saw it in the theater, and it was like one of the first movies I saw in a theater in like a really really long time.
Same.
But it was, I think, it was a really fun watch, and I was like, I have to ask her at some point. As cheesy as it is, I have to
Yep.
ask her, like, how realistic is it? Because people like, and I've talked to many military individuals on this podcast and in real life, and you always kind of ask them like, what movie is the most realistic?
Yeah.
And so they'll always give a slightly different answer, but it's fascinating to hear. So I want to ask you a question that I asked everybody on the show. Actually, no, before I do that, let's talk about your book, The Flip Side.
Yes.
Obviously, to put your work out in a book is a huge step, and to make an impact. What was that like? Because obviously I'm writing a book now, and so I
Mhm.
understand the difficulties of it and the things that go into it. Was that one of the hardest things you've had to do?
I have such mixed feelings because it was really cathartic for me to be able to tell my story in a longer form and to share some of the nuanced stuff that we talked about today. I don't get to do that in a polished 45-minute keynote. I don't get to do that in a 30-second Instagram reel or a post. And I wanted people to really understand all the pressures, the adversity, the wins, and then give them things from that. I didn't want to just have a memoir that told stories, but I also think storytelling is the best vehicle to teach people. So I wanted to tell a story in every chapter that people would be like, whoa, that's crazy. I can't believe that happened, or that must have been insane. But then I wanted to give them tools that they could use in their own lives. Most people are not going to be flying fighter jets,
Yeah.
but I want, that person that's struggling with some sort of adversity where they just lost their job, or like they just went through a breakup or whatever it is. And they're like, well, that happened. Now what? How do I respond to that? Like, that's what really matters. Or how they can be bold and make those small, bold choices, and just to give them perspective on that. So it felt very rewarding in that regard. I would say it was challenging when I got to the points of how do I talk about going through a divorce, right? When who knows who will read this book?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's pretty
What can I
vulnerable
share?
thing.
What can I not share? Yeah.
Right. And like that was such a thing that sent me down that path of just feeling like a failure. That was a big part of my story. So I had to talk about it. I think not pretending it didn't happen would feel very inauthentic to me. And then the other thing, kind of what we talked about, was how do I talk about being a woman in that world and the nuances and the pressures that came with that without feeling like I'm throwing all my friends under the bus?
Yeah.
And I think I did an okay job of that. But TBD, so when we're recording this, the book is in pre orders right now, so it's not released yet. So I don't even know how it will be received. People that have had early reads of the book for various things, I've gotten really incredible feedback. But I find myself doing what you did with your podcast, being like, oh, well, they're a media coach. They probably have to tell their clients that they really like their book. Or they're a PR firm. Of course, they're going to say the book's awesome. And so I think the true test, I believe in it, but I think it's like 95% excitement for the book to release and 5% being terrified and imagining that people from my former units, my ex family of in-laws, sister-in-laws, brother-in-law, all the things will read it. But I have to remember again that it's not about me feeling vulnerable around that stuff. It's about the impact. And a book is such a great way to have an impact on a massive scale. And that was the main reason that I started that project in the first place.
Yeah. So how can people get the book?
Yes. So it's at all the major retailers. If you just search my name, Michelle Curran or Michelle Mace Curran, either one works. You'll see it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target. Hopefully, by the time this releases, it's in Hudson News at airports. Working on that.
That's a big one. That's
I
like one
know.
of those things that like if you can get in the airports, like you've done something spectacular.
So we'll see how this conversation ages, because TBD. Work in progress on that one, but we're getting some good indications that it's saying there's a chance. So it's going to be mainstream. It's with one of the big five publishers, so you will see it in all the places that you normally can get your books from.
Awesome. I love it. So where'd you get the name Mace from?
Yes, I'm surprised we didn't kick off with this. It's a common question. So Top Gun did not get this part right. They have all these cool call signs, and they never talk about why they have them. So they sound cool. Story behind them is usually not cool. I would actually say it's never cool. They won't let that happen. So it's based on a mistake that you made generally as a young pilot at your first combat
Wow.
squadron. So it's given to you in jest, like almost like, I wouldn't say it's hazing. It's like a rite of passage to get your call sign, because they wait until you've been with the unit for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, and you finish up something called mission qualification training, which is kind of like the final graded slew of flights that you have to do. And then you're signed off where you could go into combat the next day with your squadron as a wingman. So it is like a big deal. You're like, I've been working towards this for years, and I can finally say, like, I'm a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
And that's exciting and stressful. And around the end of that, they hold a naming, which is basically in the squadron bar. Yes, we have bars in our units on a Friday night. Everyone comes together. They kick out everyone who doesn't have a call sign yet. You go hang out somewhere else in the squadron. And then all your peers are in there, and they're like, okay, who's flown with Lieutenant Curran? What dumb stuff did she do? And they have a massive whiteboard, and they just start writing it all down. And at some point, they'll bring you back in the room, and you get to see the whiteboard for the
Oh,
first time.
great.
You're just like, oh, I didn't think anyone knew about that. And then they'll kick you out again, and eventually they'll bring you back in, and they'll tell you, we're naming you this, and this is what it stands for. This is the story behind it. And you're just like, all right, this is what I shall be called for decades now.
The rest of my life.
Yeah, and you just have to embrace it. And there's also a tradition that you only tell your call sign story in person over a beverage. But I think that was a ploy to get free beer, and B, a lot of people have stories that they're really embarrassed by. And so it's a good way to like stiff arm having to tell it. I tell it during my keynote, and I had never told it on podcasts or on the internet leading up until now. But now with the book coming out, I also talk about it in there because, again, I just couldn't not talk about it.
Sure.
So I'll tell you the story because I feel like it gets weird eventually if you're like, I have a secret. Um,
By the way, I
so
also feel like that rule was made up before Zoom calls existed and this virtual world we
100%.
live in. So
It was indeed, for sure. So it's an acronym. Basically, I'll tell you what it stands for in a second. Basically, early flight in Japan that I think I referenced earlier, I was dogfighting. I went supersonic when I shouldn't have, like on accident. I went supersonic. That tells you what the F-16 is like. It's got a lot of thrust. And then I was going so fast that when I tried to turn and point at my instructor to gun him, so fake weapons loaded up, it's just practice. But during a dogfight, you got to get that other jet in front of your nose. Imagine Top Gun.
yeah.
When I roll and I pull back on the stick to do that, I'm going so fast unintentionally. The airplane has so much energy on it that I hit 9 Gs, so 9 times the force of gravity. So whatever you weigh, multiply that by 9, that's how much you now weigh.
Yeah.
And that always happens, or usually happens, but only for a few seconds. But because the jet had so much energy, I stuck that for a full 360. Yeah.
My gosh.
Sounds cool, not cool to experience.
I can't even imagine. So real quick, and we'll finish the story. But like
Yeah.
the closest I've gotten to that, there's a ride in Disney World where like you go to outer space in the ride and like they spin you so fast that you feel the G's.
Yeah.
And so I've done it twice now. My family, because we go every year, they've only done it once and they refused to do it again because they got sick. So I couldn't imagine what it'd be. I don't know how many. It's like a G or something, but like I could never imagine like 9 G's. Like you just stop breathing.
Yeah. So You can Google Air Force centrifuge training, which is like that round room with the capsule and it spins, and it's a training environment for pilots to experience it before they do in the jet. And you'll see tons of videos of people G-locking, G-induced loss of consciousness, blood gets forced out of your head. You
Ugh.
are straining against it. You're flexing all your muscles. You're wearing a suit that squeezes your lower body to push the blood back up. And talk about breathing. If you exhale all the way and your lungs deflate under 9 Gs, they're not strong enough to reinflate. So you never do a full inhale or exhale. You're doing like tiny little air exchanges just to keep air in your lungs.
Wow.
It's intense to say the
Yeah.
least. So that happens. I nearly G lock. So I have full light loss, which imagine standing up too fast and you get lightheaded. You know, you get that tunnel vision happening.
Mm-hmm.
I have that to the point of I don't see anything. So like full blackout, but I'm still aware. So I can hear, I can feel like the controls of the jet. I just like hear the jet engine. My instructor, so I'm by myself in my aircraft, right? Single seat. He's in his, but he's like watching me. He's like, why is she not pointing at me? Something is messed up. So he makes a radio call that ends the fight. So I hear this and that makes me pull back the throttle. Vision comes back, all the things. So I was like, I would say as close as you can get to a G lock without being fully unconscious, which, as you can imagine, in a single seat aircraft can have very bad ending if you don't wake
Yeah.
up in time. It's happened before. Um, it really scared me. It was a massive reality check to the dangers of the job, sent me down the start of that path of, wow, I'm not right for this. Also earned me a cool call sign, MACE, and that stands for mock at circle entry. It's like people are always like, wait, what does that mean? It's fighter pilot jargon, but you know, Mach is the speed of sound. And then circle entry is when you're trying to turn on the same circle in the sky to line up behind the other airplane. So I was going supersonic when I did that, which is not
Yeah.
how you win. Because I couldn't, you know, imagine driving your car at 60 miles an hour and trying to make a turn that requires 30 miles an hour. You're never going to make it.
Right.
So that was me in the jet trying to point at him, going so insanely fast that I could never turn tight enough. So I was just never going to get there. I was just sufferfest, no hope of winning.
I feel like I owe you a drink now since I heard the story.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I love it. I love it. So I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on this show, and I want you to imagine. I want you to fast forward to the end of your life, and everything you've created and everything you're going to create over the next decades is no longer available. They can't get the book. They can't get any of your podcast interviews. Can't do any of that stuff, and you can only be remembered for one sentence. What would you want that sentence to be?
Have the courage to start something, even when you don't feel ready, because you'll figure it out along the way.
I love it. I love it. Now, before we get to my last question that I asked every single person, I want to ask you because both you and I are step parents now.
Mhm.
So what's it been like being a step parent for you? Because for me, it's been the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, and I've done some pretty crazy things. And I would love to hear your take on being a step parent.
It is a weird experience because I feel like people don't openly talk about the pros and the cons and like the great parts and the hard parts. And I got married my first year on the Thunderbirds. So I am brand new to this intense environment. It's like being a professional athlete during season, right? Like we're on the road 240 days a year. We're gone all the time. My stepson at that time was 6 years old. So he's like past the little kid phase, but he's very much at that point where he's like really attached to parents and his mom is very much in the picture. So there's like navigating all of that while going through the most intense professional experience of my life and in the public spotlight was quite weird. And I will honestly say that COVID was a blessing for us because that kicked off right when our show season for round two was kicking off. And I just gone through this intense winter training camp where we're flying twice a day, every day. I'm at work for 10 hours a day, and I'm about to hit the road again for 240 more days. And there's this kid and husband in my life who I'm trying to build a relationship with. And I'm just so new to him, and I'm gone all the time. And I think it helped initially because I didn't step into that parent role immediately, where it can be hard to deal with like discipline and they don't accept you yet as a disciplinarian.
Yeah.
So they're just like, "You're not my mom. How dare you tell me that?" So luckily, we didn't really deal with any of that because I was there so infrequently that it was almost a special occasion. And when we
Mm,
did have a weekend off, which was really rare, we would always go do something together as a family. Like I don't know, we live in Vegas, so we'd like go to Big Bear or do something. Like it was just it's almost like a long distance relationship where whenever you're together, it's like you're on vacation.
yeah,
So he already like really loved me and got excited when I would be home after the first year. And then COVID happens, and that allowed us to just spend so much time together for like a solid month. We're just stuck at our house, and we really bonded a lot more. And so I think it actually worked out really well because the day to day schedule and do your homework and brush your teeth and all of that kind of came second after we already got to build this like loving relationship. And at the time, I thought it was like, this is not ideal. How the heck am I going to build a relationship with this child when I'm gone all the time? In hindsight, I think it actually was like a blessing in disguise because he doesn't really push back. Like he just has accepted me so
sure.
easily, and it's been awesome. And we have a great relationship, and I still travel a ton for work. So I don't get to see him as much as I wish I did because my husband definitely runs the day-to-day stuff with him because he's here all the time.
Sure.
But I think we're still really close, and I love being a step parent. I think it's taboo to talk about the struggles of being a parent and not having time for yourself, not being able to pursue your own passions. And I think for both of our families, it's really amazing because we have bonus parents and we still get our freedom to do the things, go on a date night or go on a little trip or whatever with just my husband and I. And there's no guilt around it because our stepson or my stepson is with his mom and vice versa. And I think it's actually a great balance. And of course, we would have him full time in a heartbeat, but that's not the situation. And so I think there's a lot of silver linings in it.
Yeah, I started dating my now wife when the kids were 6 and 8. We're full time, so it's a different scenario right
Yeah,
off the bat, and it
for
was right
sure.
before COVID, and so then we had the COVID, and like Lauren was off doing yoga teacher training, and I had to like be with these kids I didn't know, and it's like this weird like what's
Yeah.
happening right now, like how do I handle this? It's and being a step parent it's something that should be talked about more because it is a different experience. But I love how you portrayed it, and like obviously, it is a beautiful connection that you would not see in any other way, shape, or form. And it is very much like, how do I connect with this person, this little
Mhm.
person that is now in my life? Like, what do I do? So I love how you painted that picture. So let's get to the important stuff. You already mentioned where to get the book, but where can people follow you, get more, obviously content from you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm super active on multiple platforms. I would say Instagram is great. It's just Mace underscore Curran, so call sign underscore last name. And then LinkedIn, I actually create a ton of content on there and try to, talk more to teams and the business audience and but still very similar content to a lot of the stuff we talked about. And then macecurran.com is my website.
I love it. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Oh, there's so many. I think if we have to take it down to a single moment and not like a massive time span, finding the courage to apply to the Thunderbirds. That was just a catalyst for all of the stuff I'm doing now. And it was scary. So
Yeah.
I think the pros greatly outweighed the cons.
I love it, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad you did it because what you're doing now, making an impact, helping people shift through that discomfort in their life in order to create the life they deserve.
Mhm.
It's so powerful. So thank you so much, Michelle, for doing what you do. Thank you for coming on the show. This was amazing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited to hear how it's received by your audience, but this has been fun.